Tell us.
Welcome to The Collective, where every conversation ignites a new perspective. Join us as we delve into the journeys of remarkable individuals, explore the art of growth, resilience, and the power of a shared mission as we strive to be better together.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another wonderful collective. I am super excited for this show. I've been thinking about it for a couple of weeks now, and I cannot wait to get started on this. Now, while I'm excited, y'all should be too. Like the show, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, do all that good stuff, get your emails whenever we go live, which is, of course, Fridays for the collective, Wednesdays for the gold mine. If you have any thoughts, questions, comments, anything at all, by all means, put them up in the comment section. We can hit those throughout the show. Other than that, I'm just really pumped for this. Oh, you know what I did forget? Make sure that if you want to stay in the loop with everything collective, that you sign up for the Reinforcement Loop, which is our weekly newsletter, goes out on Sunday. And other than that, I'm excited. So let's get into some intros, and then we'll get right into the conversation. Alana, you're on top. Hit us up, 10 to 15 seconds. Who are you? Where you come from? All that good stuff.
Thank you. And every time you ask me that, it just gets different and changes, and I have still no idea what I do. So I'm Alana Stott. I live in California. Obviously from Scotland. I am various things: certified human trafficking investigator, work in OSINT, 3 kids, and married to a UK Special Forces guy.
Bam. I love it. Kate, it's been a while. Why don't you give us a rundown?
So I'm currently in Colorado. Been all over the Rockies, and I'll probably be here for quite some time. I am a neurophysiologist by training, so researcher and scientist. I work within the military and first responder communities, including within special operations communities, as an educator, coach. I've dabbled in entrepreneurial activities, kind of lots of different things these days.
I love it. I love it. Pat, how about yourself?
I'm Pat Miller. I spent 20 years in the Canadian Armed Forces, infantry, special operations. I've had a pretty good career in that. Once I retired, I went to the film industry, became an armourer and film advisor, and then pursuing professional photography.
Bam. Love it. Sean, how's the mountain treating you?
Things are good. What a great panel, huh?
Right.
I mean, I was explaining this panel to someone yesterday on the sidewalk here in Roslyn in front of my favorite little bakery, the Hoopers. And I was trying to describe how this might go as I see it. And I'm just really thankful for the 2 ladies, honestly, to show up on a subject like masculinity. Because I feel like when the topic comes up, it's like a bunch of bro-hemos all patting each other on the back and telling each other how masculine we are. But I know we screw it up bad. And so I'm glad that we're going to have kind of a 360 on this one, or a more balanced conversation, or a more balanced perspective, perhaps is the correct term. So thanks for joining us, ladies, and Pat.
And Pat. I'm sure he's been called a lady once or twice before in the military. Now, so my first question right off the bat, I want to get your guys' definition of masculinity. What do you think masculinity is in your own words? And then also, how have you seen it evolve over time? And I'm going to start with Pat. What do you think?
Can I repeat the question? Sorry.
All good.
So I want to be able to hit it right.
What is your definition of masculinity, and how have you seen it evolve over time?
Yeah, I guess even the second time, it was kind of hard to go through the brain there, because I mean, the definition of masculinity, from my point of view, is it's a hard one, because I mean, we have the biological animal sense of hierarchy and masculinity, of what a male animal does. You know what I mean? If you look at pack animals like wolves and things like that, right? And you see how it kind of translates to the human experience, and then you have our actual conscious, beliefs of what masculinity is with culture and society, and even what's self-imposed on ourselves. And so it's a very dynamic definition, and I can't give you an answer perfectly right now on what masculinity is, because I believe that it changes for me as it goes, right? Like in my 20s, if you asked me what masculinity was, it'd be like, crushing beer cans on my head and freaking being a big idiot, you know what I mean? And now I believe it's about, evolution and holistic, a 360 kind of belief and approach. There's times to be tough and strong and a leader and protect, my family or my group. Another time to be soft and, nurturing, not necessarily like, yeah. So it's so dynamic. It's so dynamic, especially at this age.
I couldn't agree more. I've been wrestling with this for the last little while as well. Just like trying to get an actual definition in my head, and I couldn't quite bring one. Kate, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it is really complicated because I think the definitions matter. And, I think a lot of times we lump too many things to a term, and then it gets all muddled and confusing, and it is hard to define. So I like to think about it and separate it from when I'm thinking about the definition, like they're intertwined, but I try to separate it. So like there's certain things about maleness when we're talking about like sex differences, like what makes a man versus a woman. And as a scientist and physiologist and neuroscientist, I think about that in terms of like biology and biological changes and things that happen in utero to make, a human being kind of male or female as the sex differentiators happen, right? And then as that human being develops, there are other things that happen physiologically that reinforce like maleness or femaleness. And so there's that, right, with regard to like sex differences, but then there's this idea of masculinity. And that I think of as in terms of different traits and characteristics that can be expressed and often are more associated with maleness and men, but that are kind of I like to draw on like more of the psychological terms like Jungian psychology and archetypal psychology to talk about like this balance of masculine traits and characteristics versus feminine traits and characteristics. And the masculine ones tend to be more agency oriented, whereas the feminine traits tend to be more like communion and expressive oriented. And so those are kind of the huge umbrella terms I use to sort of differentiate it. But I would say that human beings can have a balance of both. Women can have masculine traits and characteristics as well as feminine, and that balance can shift from person to person. And obviously we associate more masculine qualities with men. But all of that is in kind of the context of how we're raised, right? Like the family we grew up in, the culture, what we're indoctrinated with, if we pick a specific career like special operations, what happens there to reinforce certain ideas and norms. And so to the points already made, it is confusing because depending on the context that you might be given a different definition of what masculinity is. And for a man or a woman, that can be very confusing when you thought it was something else. And so for me, I tend to think of masculinity as that collection of traits that may be stereotypical, but I think maybe stereotypical for a reason that I think has been associated with something negative because of this toxic masculinity thing, which I would be happy to get into in a little bit. But I think that there are so many, like these are good things, right? These are traits that when used in the right way are exactly what is needed in a situation. And so masculinity in and of itself is a good thing. It's just a question of how it's applied and then, how people are interpreting that. So that was kind of a long ramble just to say that, these definitions do matter. And I think that how we apply them impacts a person's experience. Like you brought up this question of what does it mean to be a man in the world today? Well, these things matter, right? So that'll impact somebody's experience.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. This is one of the reasons why I started with kind of such a broad question is the fact that it's such a broad question. Alana, you got any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, so I would, on the back of what Kate said there, where we're automatically, when we hear the word masculinity, we're almost jumping straight into the toxic masculinity. And that's not what we really should be thinking about, is that masculinity is a set of terms within themselves, biologically, primitively, however we want to put it. Like there is certain traits that are more associated to men and that are more associated to women for the femininity. I think that what we've done is we've mixed up in adding in that toxicness into it almost straight away. When the word masculinity is spoken, we're thinking like biceps and bullets, and we're thinking like this tough guy, this Chuck Norris, this theme that we've kind of built up around it. But I think that from researching my own masculine traits and my own feminine traits, I think I've worked out that we have that yin and yang within each of us. And the problems that society might give us is that we have to kind of push harder on one of the traits than we maybe necessarily want to. My son's holding a bit of bread right in front of me here, like I'm managing to make a sandwich while I'm having this conversation. I'll be with you in 2 seconds. But just have it. Yeah. So there you go. There's the masculine, can't make a sandwich. So I think I actually asked my husband this morning, I said, what do you think of when you think of masculinity? And he said to me, if you spoke to me a few years back, he would have been like how much he works out in the gym, like what position he's got to within the military. Did he get to tier 1? Is he able to push out 50 press ups still? Can he break world records and do all these things? And he said, from a lot of personal development, he has found that to be within his true masculine, he's had to discover the feminine elements within his life that he was blocking out or that he wasn't comfortable with. And he realized that all that other stuff that he put forward into what masculinity was, to really show up in his true masculine, was about how he was showing up. It was about how he looks after the feminine in his life, how he comes forward for us. And is he providing that safety? Is he providing that reassurance that the feminine can go out and do what she needs to do? So providing that yin and yang balance of feminine and masculinity that is within all of us. We all have it. And there's been times in my life where my masculines had to come out a lot stronger because I maybe don't have that other part that should be protecting or could be protecting me. But when we sink into what we really are, into our true feminine or our true masculine, it can be a lot more powerful. And I think that works really well when that comes in a balance with two people. So long story short, I think it's how we show up.
I am down with this 100%. Sean, would you like to add a little bit of a
I'll throw in a twist. It's not much of a twist though, because I'll start off by saying this, that this conversation should have happened like 50 years ago, 80 years ago, 1,000 years ago. I wish it would have happened when I was in my 20s, because I was surrounded by a bunch of guys. We all thought we were pretty masculine. We couldn't even barely spell it. We didn't even know what it meant. And till today, I'll understand masculinity better by the end of this podcast than I did before I started the podcast. And that's really the key to me. The generalized question that you put out is really broad, Chance, but I think it's a great question because, like Pat, had a little bit of a moment there, like, oh, well, I'm on the spot. What does it mean to me? Well, I think every guy's on the spot anytime they get blasted with that question, because we just haven't really thought about it. We kind of do what we do. We are who we are. And when it comes to masculinity, we buy into the false social construct that is overlaid on top of maleness. Like Doc Kate said, I do believe there's a very important distinction between maleness and masculinity. And so, I want to think that the three guys on this panel represent maleness and masculinity. But our maleness has more commonality, whereas our masculinity doesn't necessitate commonality. Because the masculinity aspect, as I see it anyway, is basically the social fabric construct that you take in or on, and then develop out in a way that you think is masculine. And so as society tends to do, extremism, or taking a subject and making it more extreme, tends to get more attention. And I believe that the maleness is always existent in every dude. The masculinity piece is the overlayer that can be interpreted correctly or incorrectly by the male. And then if they start attracting certain attentions, or they start getting more validation, or they start like riling up their neighbor by saying overly masculine things like, I'm an alpha male. Well, that's how things get distorted. And then the young bucks, the young men that are coming up, who just like me and Pat and Chance when we're in our 20s, who we didn't have a clue on any of this stuff. We'll start following someone. We'll start paying attention to a guy who's senior to us, who appears to have the definition figured out. But it's only because we, in our young, tender age, didn't consider what it meant to us before we jumped straight into what it means to other dudes who are spouting off masculinity. It's pretty easy for a 16-year-old, 17-year-old, 18-year-old, 20-year-old male to slide straight into the terrible trap of following an online personality who is the triple alpha male. And that's what's dragging us down right now as men, as far as I'm concerned, is not distinguishing what maleness is, what masculinity is, and more correctly, what good masculinity is. So hopefully over the next 2 hours, we'll figure some of this stuff out, because I need the help. And I freaking guarantee that every dude out there needs the help.
I 100% agree with that one as well.
Can I add something to that? Yeah, just Sean, I would really appreciate what you just said, and it made me think about where that term toxic masculinity even came from. So it really didn't kind of come about until like the early 1980s. I think it was Shepard Bliss and Robert Bly were writing about this because they were noticing that changes in the family, and young men were growing up without father figures. And they were noticing that these young men were growing up and they had what they called like an immature masculinity. It just didn't seem like a deeply rooted masculinity in their eyes. And it seemed like it was because there was no male figure defining it for them and demonstrating it for them and leading them through it. And so they were sort of like Lord of the Flies, kind of left to their own devices to figure out what masculinity was. And it ended up, especially at young, adolescent age, kind of showing up in a very immature form. And so that's kind of the term that they gave it, but it wasn't meant to be derogatory. It was meant to be a term describing this masculinity that didn't get deep roots and wasn't really like drawn into something larger, like part of a tradition. And they actually, this is fascinating. And it kind of bums me out because here we are, 45 years later, and there's still no change. But they mentioned that because of this issue of the loss of, an elder, a father figure teaching and passing on this kind of understanding and these traditions, they were saying that maybe it would that young men would benefit from ritual and tradition, and we don't have that anymore. And if there were these rites of passage that sort of brought young men through what it means to become a man and demonstrate that for them in a healthy way, maybe they could combat some of these issues that have arisen from this, quote unquote, toxic masculinity. So it wasn't meant to be a derogatory term, but it was describing a phenomenon that I think is still going on today. And you just spoke to it. If you don't have this definition described to you by men in your life and demonstrated, you're going to fall into, the alpha types that are popular and gaining influence and whatever else we define as success in the world today associated with those types of people. You're going to think that that's the goal. And so it's really interesting, but I do think there's something to that idea of rites of passage that we could capitalize on to address this, that, really the military is potentially a rite of passage for many. But I think there's other ways to do this in a way that could benefit all men.
So I want to jump straight onto that because I was unaware of the etymology of toxic masculinity. So thanks for that. I now got new history on it. And so I can understand how that came to be. However, now today, as I see it, it's got absolutely nothing to do with whether there's a father in the household anymore. There could be 12 fathers in the household at that point, but the internet exists in the bedroom. And so now the father is the internet. going to ignore dad. I'm going to pay attention to my friends online. I'm going to pay attention to Andrew Tate. I'm going to pay attention to some nerd out there who's just leading men down the wrong path. And so, this rite of passage, to your point, Kate, is not really existent on the internet, other than maybe as a rite of passage. It's how do you become seen or validated? How do you get big on the internet is almost a rite of passage as a young man nowadays. How do you get the glamour, the glitz, the flash? How do you stand next to the day rent Ferrari and get 1,000 photos and use that for the rest of your life to demonstrate that you're a masculine man? And so, like, the rite of passage, I think, was better established, 10,000 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 100 years ago, 50 years ago. But now we've got the internet as a rite of passage. And I'm just throwing that out there. What do you guys think?
I would jump on the back of that, Sean, to say that exactly the question we're talking about is how do we form that strong masculine within the house? Yes, we do find that boys are getting a lot of their I mean, I think if you go onto the war room at any 1 minute, the war room is Andrew Tate's platform. There's 16,000 young guys on there at any time getting their information from that person. Back to Kate's point, in the 80s, we increased that. We have to work. We have to be the best. Capitalism's everything. We have to own as much as we can. We have to work hard. Like, working 100 hours a week was considered, impressive. Whereas these kids are getting all their information elsewhere. To be within your masculine and really be strong is something that we were told that we're not allowed to do, like boys don't cry kind of situation. Whereas if the dad's there and he's saying, son, talk to me, like, what is going on? Like, what do you need to know? How can I help you with things? Like, women are very good at doing that. We talk to each other. Communication as a whole within families has kind of gone down a lot. And that's big. I'm a big proponent of the family dinner table, sit around and talk to each other and just hear those stories. But to really come into our masculine is sitting having that conversation with your son. How's things going? What's happening? What do you need to know? What's new? What's, that just communication side of it is how we get past the Andrew Tates and the other people that are being in there. So what you were told not to do was, like, don't talk, don't cry, don't have those communications. If we could push that away, then we can eliminate a lot of that stuff, because these influencers can do as much as they want to do. But if you're influencing, with, as me and my daughter are in constant communications about everything and whatever she wants to talk about and however she wants to talk about it. And that's what I encourage Dean to also do with Tommy, to make sure he's got that connection to be able, like, whatever that boy needs to talk about, his dad is there for him without any judgment, without any question, just that ear to listen to him. So the reason that the Tates of the world manage to grow their followings and do that is because they don't have that.
I got so many notes here that I want to jump on. Pat, you got a thought before I jump in here?
Yeah, sure. I'll jump in. There's a few things here. It's very interesting, like, how we do have the internet. Like Sean's talking about some of these influencers, and I don't know where some of the programs are, these days from when I was a kid. Like cadets was one. Junior Forest Wardens was another. I know people probably have no idea what that program is, but that taught us how to, like, survive in the woods, and it's all about, like, stewardship for the environment and stuff like that. But it still is most of the instructors were men, and they taught us how to survive off the land, and it taught us a lot of cool things about culture and all stuff like that. So, like, I was lucky because my father, he was military as well, so he was gone a lot, right? Exercises, tours, whatever. I luckily had that the tribe idea of, like, surrounding myself with decent men, whether it was Cub Scouts, Junior Force Wardens, or cadets, before joining the military and going through other crucible events. So, like, we talked about, like, rites of passage. We talked about having those type of masculine archetypes around us. I think it's vital for the development of a young man, and the internet can be probably one of, if you want to use the word toxic, I'll definitely drop that. It is toxic, the internet, for a lot of that stuff. Talking about certain characters that I don't think is masculinity. I think it's all shock value, and it's basically like bad TV. It's like Jerry Springer TV, like some of these guys trying to push these ideas. And the problem is that some of it is seeping into some of these young men's brains, and so much so that sometimes they're retaliating. Like, so they'll follow these guys, they'll go down that extreme, and then they'll have this huge pendulum effect where they go completely to the opposite, and like nobody's living in the middle. Like like the living in the gray sometimes is great. Like we're so polarized these days, and like learning what is within the window without going to either extreme, I think is vital, and it is an important part of developing masculinity.
I 100% agree with that one. The beautiful part about this is that I think, at least from my experience, rites of passage, when you do some research on them, they're almost always about pain or stoic or time-based, where you have to do something uncomfortable for a while, and you have to be able to manage that in a very stoic manner, right? Even basic training, you're going to get screamed at, you're going to be doing lots of push-ups, you're going to be doing all these things. That's great. But most rites, what do you got, Pat? What do you got?
Well, I just wanted to add on that, because like I was literally just talking about this yesterday. I was talking about my jump course, about how it's a crucible event, and I was talking about the harnesses to my partner, and I was talking about how you have this nice 1.5 wide inch webbing, like if it was nice and flat, it would go between the legs just nicely. But after decades of courses, it is now folded in half, so it's like a piece of piano wire between your legs, and you're hanging from these racks for hours. And the only thing you do is your drills. You don't talk, you don't whine, you don't do anything. If you want those wings, you hang and you take the pain and you do it, right? I don't know. It was just something that popped in my brain, and I was just thinking about it because there's plenty of women that pass the jump course, but it is a crucible event that when you finish it, there's something there. There's something that develops character.
And so it's Chance, you'd use the word pain or, long pain. I just think of it as simply adversity. Adversity is a pretty good catchword for many things. And to dive onto the jump course, on my military freefall parachutist course, we were the last course, as far as I'm aware of, that jumped the 7TU, or the round chute. So we used to call it the look, reach, pull, detonate. And so when you pulled your chute, this thing popped open like you hit a brick wall. You de-accelerated so fast that it was measured upwards of 11 Gs. Every time the chute opened, guys were having their eyeballs blow, like just turn instantly red, or passing out. Or my partner told me before every jump, come and find me on the DZ and put my shoulder back in, because his shoulder would dislocate on opening shock. Why did they get rid of the 7TUs? I have no idea. And so to your point, Pat, on the harnesses, and maybe they're uncomfortable. Well, on my jumps, after I'd finish a jump, I'd have to get 2 field dressings and tuck those under the straps just to soak up the blood before my next jump. And at the end of the jump, when I'd land on the ground, these things would be soaked with blood, and I'd put in fresh ones. And that's how the day went. And so it was adverse. And I love the crucible because it teaches you a lot about yourself and the things that you want. But many years later, to your point, Pat, you can look back on those things and sort of like nod at the notch in the belt of, yeah, I managed that. That was something that was pretty hardcore. And I checked that box. Those crucibles are pretty rare nowadays, unless you get into institutions like the military or et cetera. And I'm not saying that you've got to go all large and in charge and head straight for the tip of the spear, because Pat, you'd raised cadets. Funnily enough, we were probably both in the same cadet corps in Grand Cache. And so in cadets, as a kid, I thought it was pretty rad. I was going through my own little crucibles in cadets. Now, they weren't a big deal to me now, but back then, when I was a young buck, it was like it was wild. I thought I was out there being like Chuck Norris and Rambo. And so isn't it interesting that the cultural stereotype, or the phenom, or the figurehead, or the avatar that is used loosely as a manly man is what I was trying to live up to, even when I was in freaking cadets. And I didn't understand a thing, but still I was attracted to wanting to be something that I thought was manly, because no one else was describing to me what manly is or was. And so all you had was your Mark I eyeballs and staring around at the world, looking for solutions that were pretty hard to find. And often the solution was found by yourself in the crucible.
Yeah, I couldn't not agree. The beautiful part about this is that what I wrote down here was the rites of passage require pain, but the piece beyond that is that men and sons would often work together. And this goes to Alana's point that I want to touch on as well, is that you had said that there's a lot less, male people in the house, or there's a lot less significance correction when you were saying to talk with each other, right? Where you wanted Dean to talk to his son more often and be more integrated in that way. But men used to take their sons to work. That's where that happened. And then they got separated, I think, over time through this, the evolution of what we are, our society nowadays. But I think those two pieces are together, because the rites of passage would be built up by fathers with their sons, right? It'd be like, oh, you got to come up to this thing. You have this thing ahead of you. Here's how we can prepare. Here's how I went through mine. You get that intimate level of communication through time spent together, doing things rather than sitting down and talking. Because I think even within the masculine mind, we like results. We like to see tangible results, which is why also I think the internet is so effective for young men, is that they get to see the results instantaneously, right? It's that immediate gratification versus the long burn of the kind of old school way of doing things. Because I'm thinking about time spent on the ranch and hanging around old cowboys who everything about them is stoic. They don't complain. They don't whine. They certainly don't cry. They don't talk to anybody. That kind of masculinity was what I grew up with. And it's it could be confusing for a young guy if you don't have that solid background. The question I have for you guys is, how have you seen masculinity evolve? Because I've seen it change over the 42 years I've been around. Societally, I guess, the idea of masculinity has changed. How have you guys seen it change? Kate, I'm going to come to you first. What do you think?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think what sticks out the most as you were asking the question was just this idea of what has traditionally been these are characteristics and traits that are so valuable and so necessary in certain circumstances. And it's been something that, again, this term toxic masculinity, which wasn't meant to be a negative thing, but has been sort of co-opted by people who want to have made it something negative, very negative. And it's really demonizing not just masculinity, but men. And I think what's happened is there's been this like confusion of what masculinity is. And it's like all of a sudden any trait associated with a man is lumped into this category. And it's said that, and it's sort of the pop narrative is like, that's not good. And we need everybody, men and women both need to get more in touch with their feminine and become more, emotionally expressive and fluid and all these different things. And to Alana's point that she made a while ago, I think about this as sort of the yin and yang, and both are necessary and both show up in various ways. And every situation, it's contextually specific as to how we should respond. I mean, there are some situations that require stoicism and being direct and assertive. And there are other situations that might require a little bit more nuance and some emotional connection and communication. But like all humans have that. And I think all humans have access to all of that. We have tendencies to be one way or another, for sure. But I think this idea of masculinity that's changed so much has become like this idea that it's a bad thing and that men should be ashamed of it if they do act assertive or angry or express anger or those types of things. And then at the same time, we're given in media, right? Movies, we're shown the hero, right? Like the epitome of what a man is this hero, and this, these comic-based movies, right? Like the Marvel movies of all these heroes, and that's something to aspire to, and it's applauded. And yet, like in normal day-to-day life, that's that's not actually true. It's like those qualities that made that hero the hero are there. People are being told, don't do that, don't be like that. And then the flip side in media is like the, sort of effeminate stay-at-home dad. And it's like these two polar opposites. And those are the visions or the ideas of masculinity that are given to people these days. And it's a continuum. And to your point about fathers helping sons in sort of rites of passage, there's supposed to be this sort of grounded, deep-rooted masculinity that I think is like the true definition of it. And we've got these caricatures today, and it's being demonized at the same time. So it becomes, I would imagine, I'm not a man, but I've seen the effects of this on the men in my life. And I feel like people that I know, and you guys can speak to this better than I can, are just, it's kind of confusing, and they're having a hard time navigating and showing up in the world in a way that's like appropriate according to the societal norms. And I think that's doing a huge disservice, because it's not allowing people to be who they really are and express things the way that it comes naturally to them, and to be able to pass that along to other men in healthy ways. So, yeah, I think it's gotten to a point where it's become really challenging. And then there's this, I guess, along with toxic masculinity, you have this pushback against it that reinforces those alpha types that are like, we're going to push back against this notion of toxic masculinity and dig in deeper and reinforce kind of a very static and maybe unhealthy in certain ways type of masculinity that continues to get perpetually passed on. So it's like this weird pole. It's become very distorted. Probably not a helpful answer, but
no, it's all good. I know lots of guys that I know the mentality of the, like, you don't like this? Well, now I'm going to do it harder. Like, I can totally see that happening. Pat, you got any thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is going to be controversial, but what happened to the days of where, like, when you're a young buck and you're acting out, you got thumped out. You know what I mean? Like, we don't do that anymore. And I know, like, society would really push back against that. But, like, I doubt that some of these super alpha dudes that are, like, beaking their lips would be beaking as hard if they got thumped out at a younger age and kind of got set straight. Like, like back in the military, and I know this is I'm going to go hyper masculine in a sense here with the whole military thing. But, like, one of the biggest things in an infantry platoon is that when you had young buck privates come in, kept your mouth shut and you did your job. And if you didn't, you normally got thumped out by the corporals, because the corporals would friggin' be we'll say the stewards of the section and the platoon, right? Because it shouldn't be making it up to the sergeant, right? And there's this hierarchy, and like we need that hierarchy back in society. Because back in the day, like I remember when I was in high school and such, like, there was an hierarchy. Like we have lost that hierarchical sense. And I'd say that the masculine and male thrives well when we understand the ladder of where we're supposed to be. And these guys are so far out, like the hyper masculine, we'll say like the Tates and all that stuff like that. They're so far out there and being so listened to. And these guys keep listening to them because, there's never been the challenge. Like the alpha, like, now I'm almost like afraid to use the word alpha, but the alpha wolf hasn't come along, wrapped its teeth around its neck and like said, hey, whoa, simmer down, bud. Right? Because like you look at like pack mentality, you look at wolf mentality, you don't see the alpha male of the pack running around being boisterous and ridiculous. No, he leads and he protects his pack. And I'm just coming back to pack animals, but like that's just where my brain is. But yeah, that's what I thought for now.
I'm digging it. The I wrote down here, navigating the hierarchy, is that you're right. There still is a hierarchy out there. We just, I think, have lost the instruction on how to navigate it at a young age, right? The hierarchy has changed to a degree. So it feels like there's a disconnect from what we learned in high school of like, this is what the hierarchy should look like. And now it's not. Like it doesn't compute anymore. And I think this is it's a beautiful place to go. Alana, you got any thoughts on any of this?
I do. Going back to Kate's point about the confusion, like we're looking at, and Kate will be able to give us better stats on this. I think 22 to 40 suicides a day amongst our veterans and things. And I think that a lot of it is because they've got no idea exactly how they're meant to be showing up right now. Like, what are we meant to be doing? Are we meant to be fighting wars? Are we meant to be protecting? And then all the way down to there's dudes out there dressing as women, really confused about why anything's happening. And I think that if we went, I mean, I know we've got back to the 80s there, but let's go all the way back. You know, if you look at like Jesus, like look at the way he was with Mary, about how close they were. Like, there's a lot of evidence to show that they worked really well as a team, that there wasn't some sort of male dominated situation going on with them. They were working together, they were doing their thing. And it wasn't until Jesus passed that the other guys got together and were like, okay, we're going to just make Mary the complete villain in this whole thing and just change everything around. And then you know, Muhammad and Khadija, if we look at that situation, if we look at the way Islam's kind of gone, if you go straight back to, you know, Muhammad was Khadija's, he worked for her. She was his boss, and she was a very, very, very successful market trader. She traded in herbs, and she helped people, and she taught him how to help people. And like, he was completely in love with her, and like would do anything for her till she died. So there was a really strong relationship there that then got flipped as to what this more masculine society wanted to create, because the thought of this, the women being having any control was just too much for them. And to back to what you were saying, like the rite of passages, it's almost like we associate that immediately with pain. Like a rite of passage has to have some sort of pain, but we're looking at it in a physical way. If you look at some of the like indigenous cultures and things there, like their rite of passages are mental strength building. You know, we're sitting doing vision quests for 4 or 5 days, or we're doing something that really involves us to go deeper within ourselves, rather than like to bleed and to hurt. We're actually like really going into ourselves to find out what's going on. And I think there's a great rise in men, especially military men, seeking that way of life, to go and do plant medicine ceremonies and to find things that are going to make them go within there. Because it is, I'm not saying it's easy, but it's a lot easier to stand in a ring and be punched in the face, or to do something that's physically hurting you, than to sit in a circle and go within yourself and find out what that pain was, where it began, how it happened, and how we can address it. You know, like most of what we've saw over the past, I guess, 40 plus years, longer than that, we've seen them addressing it through alcoholism or through abuse and violence and all these things that are coming out. But when you're finding these guys are actually going back to the root cause of what's happened and pulling it out, that to me is like some real strength going on there, because you're dealing with some of the toughest things that have happened. Especially, you know, if you look at the special forces community, I believe, and Kate, you can correct me on this, but like 75% of PTS and things is coming from childhood. It's not coming from war. So they're having to really go back and get that fixed. And then by fixing that, they're breaking these generational cycles of pain and abuse and things like that that's been going on. But I always say this to you, Chance and Sean, as well, that I think that one of the biggest solutions is just going back to what PJ said as well, is where's the kind of chivalry gone? Where's the please and thank yous gone? Where, you know, the exact same thing, like my grandparents would like clip my brothers around the ear if they didn't say please or thank you. Or, you know, if there was an old lady got on the bus, like it was just natural for them to stand up and give her the seat, or a pregnant woman or something, or holding a door open. The amount of times I get doors slammed on my face now by guys, I'm like, hold that door open. It just starts with the real basics like that. Just saying please and thank you, holding the door open and bringing back. Dean is like the biggest proponent to bring back chivalry. It's like, where's it gone? What's happened here?
Yeah, that one, it's a big one for me. And it brought up the idea of, is there a foghorn going on? I don't know where that came from. The interesting thing for me was that it brought forward the accountability, right? The father figure accountability would bring accountability. Let me put it that way. So you would be, as a young man, we would be held accountable. I do for my boys as well. If they ask for something, and I will stare at them until they know what they need to say, or I will give them a little shove in the arm or something like that until base level requirements. We did a whole show on manners actually just a little while ago. Talk about how you show up every day matters. Sean, you got any thoughts?
I do. Before they slip out of my head, I just want to hit on the point that was raised, which was excellent. And this is about the hierarchy, how it used to be and how it is now. I think the difference is now there isn't any accountability, as you just said, Chance, when it comes to hierarchy. You get to go from base level and skip right to the top next to your rented Ferrari in a day and a half and call yourself the man. And then there's no accountability. The accountability is this mega validation. And it's just this self-perpetuating cycle of false shortcuts with zero accountability. And then you bump, raise right to the top of masculinityville. And it sucks because it's so contrary to what I believe masculinity to be. And masculinity is a hard, long path. It's a grind where you screw a bunch of things up, you learn your lessons, and you try to do better. And decades later, you may have a better understanding of masculinity only if you sit in conversations like this, because the grind will only teach you so much, but the shortcut will teach you nothing. And so the accountability aspect is super important. Now, to what Kate was saying just a little bit ago, and that is, with adversity, and as Alana said, there are realms. And as far as I'm concerned, the 4 realms are your physiological, your psychological, your emotional, and your spiritual. And like this plant medicine phenomenon, this recent movement, this initiative, this path forward, perhaps for some people, not just men, but also women. I think, the medicine does, I have engaged in ayahuasca, so I understand it to some degree. And I have engaged in plant medicine to some degree. And so this is not guesswork. I think that a part of it is the plant, a part is the intention, but maybe the biggest part, and this is just a guess, is allowing a dude to step into the unknown spiritualness of their inner world, which they've never been allowed to up until they are enabled by other dudes saying, hey, man, just get in touch with your inner self. And here's a way that you can do it. The archetypes, as we're talking about masculinity, one of the archetypes is the warrior. And when you look at the warrior archetype, it's generally held up as, fairly stoic, fairly robust, good in adversity, all of that good stuff. And so what the warrior archetype isn't taught is how to get in touch with their inner feminine side. Because, forget about that. That'll make you weak, man. That's the message that was passed on way back in the day, just as boys don't cry, which is, pile of nonsense. And so I think the modern phenomenon that we're seeing now is a label called plant medicine that enables dudes who feel like they're, a warrior to step into the mystery, to step into the spirituality, to step into a new unknown. Every warrior has stepped into unknowns pretty much on the daily. But the unknown of your inner world, that's a whole different thing. And that's something that few men broach. They don't kick that door down. And so by encouraging other men to step into plant medicine as a pathway, it's not just the medicine, it's more of the mindset, the allowance of stepping through that gateway, other men letting other men know that it's okay to give that a try. It's okay to get in touch with your inner voice. It's okay to explore the mysteries of spirituality within you and the world around you. And so that's all I got to say on plant medicine. Back to your question, Chance. The perhaps the evolution of masculinity from back in the 80s till now, I think it was way easier back then, even though it was just as confusing. But you only had a few things to choose from. Masculinity was pretty one-dimensional. It wasn't talked about. There was a couple of cartoon characters, maybe a guy who spit on the sidewalk a lot. Now he's the man. That's what you do. You spit on the sidewalk. Pretty simple. But many years later, it's become super complex because there's so many characters out there. And as the years go by, there's more and more characters. And the extremes just keep sending it further and further. Now there are so many dissenting voices we can barely get commonality on whether you're a man or a woman. And that's just maleness and femaleness, never mind masculinity and femininity. And so it has changed a lot. And I think that the change to some degree is good, but we've kind of gone through a step change and then beyond without taking the moment or the time to reflect on where are we at with masculinity? Are we in a good spot or are we in a bad spot? How do we tweak it to make it better as we move forward? Those conversations just aren't had. This ball seems to be rolling under a momentum of its own force that kind of even feels like, as a guy, it's out of my control. Like masculinity is just warp factor 3ing into the future in a direction that perhaps I don't even support. But I feel like there's very little I can do to stop it or shape it, because I mean, it's just being the message that is being put out there is so ubiquitous when it comes to some of these triple alpha males that it is hard to counter their voices to some degree.
I love the term ubiquitous. First off, just want to say that that's such a great word. To your point, Sean, I think not only is it accelerated, but I see it as the pendulum, right? There's pendulum swings throughout history where masculinity is kind of this thing, and then it's kind of this thing. But you're right, there weren't a whole lot of choices, and we've gotten to a point now where the internet has just like super accelerated that pendulum swing. So it is no longer on the arc anymore, and it is just it is long gone. I looked up what the actual definition is, and it is the trait of behaving in ways considered typical for men. And I started thinking about the words themselves, the traits, where you fall into these kind of tropes or these niches or these archetypes, as you said. But then you don't think to shift, you don't think to change, you don't think to blend them together, which is what I've learned over the last 10 years, is that I can't just be an archetype forever. I have to learn what I can from that archetype and then blend it with other things. And then I can't remember who made this point early on, but it's the expression of that trait. So, chivalry is a great example. The expression of that trait is that I am here to help the people around me, especially the women in my life, because that's the type of person I want to be. That's the expression of a trait that I learned from an archetype that I have to blend with other things so that I'm not just sitting outside of a door holding it all day long while people walk in. I have to be able to blend and shift and become assertive and somewhat become passive and kind of seek between it. And I'm wondering, what do you guys think about how do people find that balance? How do we teach this generation going forward how to find that balance? Because I think it's so important. Pat, I'm going to come to you first. What do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting because it is a blend, isn't it? It's like, and I was trying to avoid using any photography metaphors today, but you look at a black and white photo, right? A black and white photo is not black and white. It is a mass graduation of grays and white and black. To be able to shift and mold and become dynamic in your approach to masculinity is very, very important. You cannot go through life with these solid blinders on. And I think that's what happens with some males and boys and men. You end up with these blinders of exactly what the external should look like for masculinity. And Sean was talking about like the internal part, right? And it's funny because for a moment there, I was like, did Hollywood really distort our brains when it comes to masculinity? And it's like, it all depends on where you looked at it, right? Like I was on a film set once and someone was referring to Clint Eastwood movies as forced machoism. And I was like, I couldn't even relate to that because there was all these dynamics, like a lot of, even like in the Outlaw Jesse James, like you see that there's more dynamic to the man than just a dude smashing rounds at other people. Like there's a lot of emotion in that movie, And so being able to look within, even in jitsu movies, it was probably the reason that I started meditating, right? Because you see the external, you see the cool guy with the knife, with the sword, katana, cutting all dudes up, and then you see him in his meditative state, and you're like, whoa, what's he doing there? And so you go and try it out. And then you realize that there's something way more to it. There's way more inside you than external part of you, right? So I guess the long story short here is we need to avoid just looking at what the external traits are to being a man, what it needs to be looking like. It's not biceps and blowing shit up. Sorry. But, it's that internal, it's an internal dynamic that evolves constantly over time. I went through the stage of like smashing beer cans on my head and, being a complete idiot, but that also developed me, and through those failures and lessons learned have turned me into a completely different person. I don't even know if I embody masculinity at all. I'm still having a hard time defining that. And as we go through this conversation, I love the fact that we are trying to. But yeah, I guess that's my long ramble.
I dig it. Kate, you got any thoughts?
Yeah, I like to think about this in terms of, we've all kind of touched on this, that like there are certain situations that call for us to show up in a specific kind of way. Maybe there's a lot of masculine energy coming in that situation that needs to happen to resolve the situation in the best way possible. Maybe it requires a little bit more feminine energy and some softness to it. I think we're all kind of on a journey of figuring that out. Nobody knows, we all learn by doing. I mean, I certainly have shown up in situations like too much one way or another, and you're like, oh, that didn't work out, or that wasn't appropriate, or that didn't honor me and what I needed. And, so I think we're all kind of constantly figuring it out. But I think about it, Alana mentioned yin and yang. I also like to think about it in terms of physiology, because sometimes that helps people make sense of it. Sympathetic nervous system, parasympathetic nervous system. There's a balance, right? And they're all, sometimes you need to be up here and you need to be on and you need to be hypervigilant and ready to go. And there are other times, like before bed, when you need to be a little bit calmer and allow your food to digest and bring all those systems down. And throughout the day, both of the sympathetic and parasympathetic are active. It's just sort of this seesaw thing of what's happening more throughout the day. And for many of us, the sympathetic activation in certain circumstances and professions is going to be higher a lot of the time because that's what's necessary. I think for us humans as well, for men and women, there's this balance of the masculine and feminine, and both are available and a part of who we are. And some of us are, men have more masculine energy and they're going to be here, but there may be situations where the seesaw tips, just like your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system finds a balance depending on your current needs of the situation. I think that the traits or the energy, masculine, feminine energy, masculine, feminine traits, there's a balance there too. And it's going to look a little different for every person. We're all a little bit different. We have, as I mentioned, sex differences that are sort of setting the stage for how we are. The stage that life will be acted upon, right, is this the functional differences that we have in our physiology due to sex differences. But then we have these so much more that's kind of added to that to make us unique. And every person's going to be some unique blend, right? So that balance is constantly shifting as we grow and learn more, but as the situations change as well. And it's a constant exploration. But one of the things that I think is really important around this is, and it speaks to kind of the polar ends of the spectrum, is that rigidity is not adaptive. So if we're rigidly masculine, like hyper masculine, and we refuse to be anything but, or women who, choose to be hyper feminine or want men to be in that end of the spectrum with them, and anything else is inappropriate, that rigidity is not healthy and it's not adaptive, and it's basic physiology. I mean, it's just we're meant to be flexible and to be skilled enough to adapt to the situation as it's appropriate. And the other thing I wanted to say is, with regard to the confusion around the term masculinity right now, I feel, Sean, as you were saying this, I was feeling sort of this confusion too, as you were describing it. But sometimes this theme comes up in lots of different ways, but it's this idea of order, disorder, and reorder. And that happens, that sort of paradigm shows up in so many different ways in life. And I think with regard to masculinity, our understanding of the term we went from a very ordered term, in some ways didn't even need to be spoken, years and years ago. It was sort of like everybody kind of understood what masculinity was. And now we're in this disorder phase of it's blown up, and there's so many different ideas of what it is, and people are confused. And I think what we're seeing now, and the reason we're having this conversation, is at some point we're going to kind of like snap back into reordering what our understanding is as a result of the disorder. It's almost a natural process. Out of the disorder, people need to make sense of it and reorder it again. And so I think we're in a really weird inflection point, lucky us, where we're in the disorder phase of all of this. And it's confusing as can be, but what's happening is our understanding is crystallizing, and we're seeing what makes sense, and we will be reordering that. I mean, we're doing it right now, but I think that good will come out of that reorder as we're going through it. We can do it in our own families. We can do it in our own communities. As a society, it'll obviously take a lot longer, but.
Can I ask you a quick question then, as you describe the sympathetic and parasympathetic homeostasis, balance, tipping point, and all of that good stuff? That's going on throughout our day, throughout our lives. But, like the prefrontal cortex or the amygdala, as an example, when these things kind of go offline, for lack of a better term, or when they're totally dysfunctional, that's more of a chronic issue. That's more of a long-term implication in respect to the nervous system. And so, are there things right now, if I can just pause the sort of free-flowing, organic, philosophical, see where this conversation goes, if I can just pause it right now and ask for you to maybe illuminate or describe some sort of indicators that someone's long-term or chronic system is off, their amygdala or their prefrontal cortex is not functioning very well at all, what would be things that a person could recognize within themselves or recognize in another person and see that, you need some work on your homeostasis, bro? So do you have any sort of actionable or identifiable points?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, whether we're talking about sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous system, or just the balance of masculine, feminine in a person's life, I think, it's certainly not perfect science, but it's one of the easiest ways to figure out if you're kind of too far in one direction or your strategy is not healthy or adaptive, is to check in with yourself and how you feel. Like, do you feel aligned? Do you feel good? Do you feel like your responses are, to certain situations are appropriate and you can respond and kind of move on? Or is it something that's causing issues and you physically are not feeling good about that? But the other thing is that you can look to the people in your life. If you're too far one way or another, whether we're talking about your nervous system or the ways that you show up with, masculine or feminine energy in situations, the people, if they're people you trust, obviously, if they're people who you don't trust or who, don't have your best interest at heart, this wouldn't be helpful. But for people that you trust and people who know you well, if you're functioning and the way that you're responding is causing problems in relationships and causing issues for you to be able to connect with other people, that's also a red flag. That maybe there's something going on there where your strategy for dealing with these things is not in that right balance. So those are, checking in with yourself and how you're actually doing, and then seeing what the feedback is from others in your life. Those are kind of the easy, low-hanging fruit ways to check in to see what's going on. And obviously so much more plays into how you respond to situations than just your nervous system and sympathetic and parasympathetic activity, or just your masculine, feminine energy. But I would say that those are kind of things to pay attention to, like, how are you really doing? And I don't know that people, until they get feedback from other people, they don't really know that what they're doing isn't great, because we adapt to stress and discomfort and chaos, and many of us thrive in it or grew up with it, and that's normal. But when it's negatively impacting your relationships, your ability to work well with others, all these different things, like, we need people to reflect that back to us sometimes.
Thank you for that, because it's such a key thing. Not only do we have to check in on ourselves, we have to ask the people around us whether we're good to go. But I think that can be a serious challenge for a lot of people. I want to just jump back into this conversation because you talked about the reorganization and the order, disorder, reorder kind of system, and it likened it. I've heard many stories that go in a certain pattern, right? There's something that is happening in the world that doesn't really make sense. Somebody has to question it, and then they have to go back in time to figure out why that thing is happening. And then they find out, well, it's for something completely superfluous. Doesn't matter anymore. There shouldn't be any reason. So one of the stories I heard was that there were two guys guarding a door for years and years. One captain decided to ask the major why those two guys were there. What are they guarding? Eventually you get to a point, they go back multiple COs to find out that those guys were guarding a door to have the room inside painted. But there was a loss of communication at one point where no one knew what. Then there was successive replacements of those guards over time to a point that it didn't make any sense. So people didn't know why that was happening anymore. And it's interesting because this happens in life all the time. We find something, we don't know why these things go on, and then we have to go figure it out. I think this is such a beautiful point. I want to go back just a little bit here. Sorry, I'm just going to check my notes. To the rites of passage concept, because I think this could be a way forward for a lot of us in terms of developing. What do we do next? How do we get this next generation moving forward? Do you think there would be a way to reintegrate some sort of rite of passage into the world? Do you think that would be possible even nowadays? Alana, I'm going to start with you. What do you think?
Yes, would be the direct answer. It's funny. I spent some time recently, and not to like go back to speaking about plant medicine again, but I spent some time with a young guy. His parents actually took him on rite of passage, as in indigenous way, back to Peru when he was 13, as in like that's how it would normally have worked during puberty and things. And he was, I guess he was like 17 or 18 when I was speaking to him. And I genuinely would say to you, it was probably one of the best conversations I've ever had. This kid was so switched on. He knew where his life was going. He knew exactly what he didn't want to do. He knew exactly what he wanted to do. And he'd been immersed in his own self for, all his life pretty much. But within this rite of passage that he'd done, I think he'd done like a 5-day vision quest with his people. And it was just so interesting to just sit and listen to this like 17, 18-year-old kid being able to just be so connected with his own self, with his own body, with his own mind. And you definitely looked at him and thought, you're not about to be one of those kids that are on the college campus saying that, well, if I could get away with it, like rape's okay, or these types of things. He was understanding in what life is. But to go back to a couple of points, Sean's point on the archetype of what a warrior is, and then what we were speaking about with all these influencers that are out there kind of telling us what it is to be a man or what it is to be masculine. And I think it's really interesting that some of the greatest stoics of the world, the people that we would think of naturally as stoicism, but it relates to the male and the female. I think like we've got points within the feminine world that our stoicism is all we can. If you've had a baby, like you'll know that there's a point in there that you don't have a choice to be erratic or crazy or anything. You just have to get this job done because this baby's coming out regardless of what you think. So you have to switch on to your greatest power within. And I think I like to study the kind of samurai mindset a lot because they're able to switch between their brain waves quicker. That the way that we want to do it while we're meditating, and we'll sit for 20 minutes in meditation, they were able to do it like that. But the most important thing I ever read about a samurai was how much respect he had for his opponent. It wasn't ever about just going in to get this bloody battle going on and fight. It was about this natural rhythm of life, and they have to do something, but then they have to have that respect there. And I think that that kind of balance of being able to work between the male and the female, even, look at 300. That was one of men's greatest movies of the last 20 years that they love to watch and love to be like, we are Sparta and all that. But like, if you really watch the movie, every time the guy wants to do something, he turns to the queen. Like she's the person who's going to give the direction and show him on which way to go here, but he's going to know how to do it, and he's going to go forward and be the man that he needs to be, but still be able to show that love and that presence when he has to too. And to your point on what we're seeing on the internet, it comes back to that communication thing. I don't know a single woman that personally, and I'm sure there maybe is, but personally, that is turned on by 10 Ferraris and giant houses and bucketfuls of cash and everything else. Like, that's almost what some of the boys are being taught. Like, this is what a woman will want. If you've got all this, you're going to be able to attract all the greatest women in the world if you've got all this stuff. And honestly, I don't know that woman. I don't know who she is, or maybe I just don't attract that type of woman in my life. But I know a lot of women, and I don't see any women that are attracted by that. Women are attracted by safety and presence and all these other things that we've discussed today. But this vision, and I believe that men are trying to get that Ferrari and the houses and all this stuff because they think it's going to give them that. Some of the greatest stories I've heard is what somebody described it as, that safe harbor, like coming, a man and a woman coming together gives that man his safe harbor. Not that he's losing his masculinity or becoming too feminine. It's just being together gives you that ultimate strength between both of you, that you're able to release. A woman can release a bit of her masculine and go deeper into her feminine. A man can release like the need for that mother love because he's got this connection here. And I think that keeps going back to that communication thing that, Dean and I went through a phase where he was going out in Libya and Yemen and Somalia and all these things all the time, thinking that that's what I wanted him to do, to go out and earn and be all this and do all these things. And the whole time I was like, I just want him to be here. I can earn enough. He doesn't need to do that. I can be doing these things. I just need him to be here. But we didn't talk to each other. And it took us just to sit down and actually have that conversation and say, this is how I need you to show up in your masculine. This is how I need you to show up in your feminine. And then we come together and we can build it ourselves. But, as a woman, I am at my absolute best when the stakes are highest. That's when I'm at my calmest. When stress levels up here, I am calm, and Dean can turn to me and do that. But there'll be, I started working with this business, Deep End Fitness, and it's basically underwater CrossFit. Effectively, you're basically working out underwater, and I'm pretty good under the water, and I thought I would be okay, but I ended up having a crazy panic attack when a load of childhood memories came flying back. And Dean was right there for me to regulate me, like he needed to be there to find that regulation. So and I know that I'm talking in a very couple way. I guess that's the only way I know how to do it in this circumstance. But I do think finding that, even if it isn't a romantic relationship, finding that balance somehow is what's going to help us.
I'm super digging this right now, and I just want to jump real quick into this because Dean was watching on the Instagram side. He jumped in here. He said masculinity isn't about loud posturing or proving your dominance, and then he goes on to say it's mastering your ego, which is 100% true. And I just want to jump in on this point because you bring up provision, and I think this is a key point of masculinity, at least in my point of view, is that there is a natural desire that I've found, and I've talked to a lot of men about this. We feel a desire to provide. And what I think gets confused a lot of times is that provision becomes physical in nature. So if I provide money or a house or a thing or whatever, big muscles, then I've done my job. I can feel satisfied in that I've done my job. But what I've come to realize, at least in my point, and I want to get Pat and Sean in on this one, is that I've come to learn that provision is about presence more than anything. So I'm going to provide a safe harbor for my wife or a safe place for my wife. That's going to change how I present almost in the moment. So if there's an incident outside and I need to be the protector, I need to be the warrior, I need to be the soldier again, that has to be able to come out in an instant, but then also subside into something else when she needs me to do that. Because I want that relationship. I want that safe harbor with her. That's what makes me masculine in the moment is to be able to provide pieces of whatever they need. Pat, what do you think?
Dude, I have a whole bunch of things to say about this. I don't know if I'll be able to articulate it because I find it very interesting. Because my partner as well, she's a mechanical engineer and has an MBA from Harvard, and she'll always earn more than I ever will. And the way that I try to provide for her is I try to take anything I can off her plate. You know what I mean? Like, this girl works 100 hours a week. And so my provision necessarily isn't monetary. It's a lot of time. It's support in whatever way I can. And there's even times, like in our past where, I had to do more of a, we'll say, masculine role when there was a really, we'll say, nefarious character was in our lives. And, I had to be in a very odd balance because I could end that person with all the training that I have and the life that I've lived. But, within the constructs of the law and all that stuff, I had to create a very interesting balance of providing, protecting, and being within societal norms. It was a very interesting time because that person wouldn't be around in different times of the world. My point is, though, is that, provision can be many things, and we have to have a spectrum of it. And it's not just, purely monetary, and that's where a lot of guys do end up down that road. The other point that I'd like to touch on and possibly discuss is, we were talking about, us going out and doing our own thing, like whether it's our own career, our own profession, going out to those war zones. I mean, for me, that was something that I wanted to do. That was a life that I wanted to live. And that was something that I had to do for my own self. Same as jumping out of planes or like getting into, being into martial arts. And I don't know if that's a genetic thing, if it was ingrained into me culturally or what, but I know it's something that I have to do or I lose myself. I lose who I am and what I am. So, and I always have that calling, no matter how much I get into we'll say a home mode, if you will. I know there's a certain point, if I do it too long, that I have to just break out and go do something, kind of dumb and masculine.
Yeah, I totally agree. Sean, you got thoughts on this? Oh, you're muted. You're muted there, Sean. How many podcasts have we done now?
Let me provide my voice. In respect to the provision aspect, I think it's a critical element of the discussion because as a man, I've felt it. I've felt when I haven't been providing enough. And I think it's a phase that every man has to go through to work out who you are. Because if you're a single man who isn't dating anyone and has no one in your life and you've got no one to provide to other than yourself, your own little tiny center of the universe lifestyle, then you won't bump into this puzzle of how to provide when you don't even know what provision means. Does it mean provide money? Does it mean provide food? Does it mean provide a safe house? Is it a safe harbor? What is it? Is it an RB-15 dinghy? I don't know what it is when I was young, but then I bumped into, people who taught me. The girls taught me what I wasn't providing. My wife, when we had our boys, they were both young. I used to ride to the kindergarten with them on my bike and on their bikes and drop them off. And then at the end of the day, I'd strap both of their bikes onto my back, ride my bike to the kindergarten and put their bikes down, wait for them to come out. And I'd just be standing there in my, you guessed it, full Lycra. And I'd be standing there in my full Lycra and there'd be one dude, me, and 1,000 ladies all waiting to pick up their kids. And they were all looking at me like a creep, like I was a creeper. Like I was not getting the love. I was getting the disdain. I was getting the doubt. I was getting the questioning. I was getting the looks that made me feel like I was in the wrong place. And so I had no one to talk to about that because back then I didn't have this. I didn't have people to talk to. And my wife was working like a dog. To your point, Pat, my wife just retired not too long ago, but she started off as a mechanical engineer and then into a PMP and then into management and then into, the sky's the limit. And she was the breadwinner for sure. And so I was like stuck wondering, how do I provide in this instance? And my provision was like changing diapers and picking my boys up at kindergarten and, trying to cook and all of the things. And doesn't matter whether I was doing a good job or not. What does matter is no one was explaining it to me, because you know what? No one else was freaking doing it. I didn't have one dude in my life who was picking up his kids at kindergarten in Lycra. I know that's pretty extreme, but it just wasn't out there. And I had no one to, after the fact, sit down and say, man, like I picked up my kids and I was getting like the stink eye, and I don't even know why. I don't think I would have got the stink eye if I'd have shown up with 2 bikes and I was a girl. But the fact at that time was it just was so abnormal that I was getting the look. And so I needed someone to talk to about that, but I needed the freaking guy to talk to. Because like, we got to figure things out ourselves with other guys sometimes. That's why I love this panel right now, because the girls are bringing the heat. But back then, kind of 15 years ago or whatever the case was, I didn't need girls. I needed a couple of dudes to sit down with and jaw it over with and say, hey, what's the pro tips on this one? Where am I at with this? How do I figure this one out? How do I do it better? Yesterday, I came in and I brought something back from the grocery store or whatever the case is for dinner. My wife's cooks most of the time now. And I the can of whatever. And I said, the hunter-gatherer is providing. And it's a funny little moment, but it's a moment that is a big story, because, whatever, 1,000, 10,000 years ago, we're all about stabbing things, throwing it over our shoulder and dragging it back to the cave and eating it. We were the hunter-gatherers. Now I'm out on a mountain bike ride. I slip by the grocery store, bring back a can of whatever. The hunter-gatherer has arrived. And so, like, it's almost like my historical position from thousands of years ago has been, to some degree, diluted by the fact that freaking any chump can go to the grocery store and bring the can of beans back and say, the man has arrived. But we need more than that. It's got to be more than a can of baked beans. The can of beans is the proxy. And so you now get to fill in the gap of what do you provide? And if you can only say one thing, if you can only say, well, I provide companionship, I don't think that's enough. I think you've got to have like at least a dozen cans of baked beans in this conversation. And they all need to be different brands, by the way. So, what do we provide as men nowadays in relationships? I think it's less than men provided 100 years ago. Even though the relationships were distorted 100 years ago, I think that men were providing more within at least their own minds. And to Pat's point, I've been in your shoes where I just thought, man, like I'm the slacker in my marriage. I'm the slacker in all of this. How do I do more? How do I provide? And so, let's see where this goes.
I think if I can jump off the back of that, it made me think about, there's a time for everything, and what Pat said about he didn't, his wife is earning, and like, is that the only way that we can provide? Is that the only way? If you think about, there's a time for everything. There's a time, I can't remember, was it the time to heal, a time to break down, build up, and there's a time to kill. And I think that we're saying that men shouldn't be allowed to think in this one way. They shouldn't be allowed to think like, don't be so angry, don't be so aggressive. Like, there is a time for that. There is a time, like one of the greatest men in my life, obviously other than Dean because he's listening, but was my granddad, my mum's dad. And he was like, when you think about when I think about the masculine, that's who I think about. He was a bare knuckle boxer. He was just but he was a teddy bear at the same time. He could give you the best hugs and he could make you feel super safe just with a word. He was just an incredible man, and he worked offshore, and he provided. He would tell these stories about the war and things. But my dad tells me about a time when he first started dating my mom, and my grandma was, I think she was an amazing woman as well, but she liked her little kind of mini skirts, and she liked attention. I think that was like who she was. And this guy had come to my granda, and we've been talking about my grandma, and he said something pretty derogatory about my grandma. So my granda basically flattened him there and then. It was just put him on the ground straight away for saying anything that was derogatory about my grandma. My dad said that he was watching it like he'd never seen anything, these fists coming out. He said as soon as he was on the ground, though, he picked him up, he took him into the kitchen, he got the wipes out, cleaned the blood, sorted everything, and said, "You don't ever disrespect my wife." And that was just the end of it. And my dad was like, my dad didn't grow up with a dad, so he didn't know what that was like. But he said it really showed him what a true man was, because he'd never seen my granda like that. My granda was such a nice, gentle kind of guy, but he flipped like that the minute someone disrespected the woman that he loved. And for me, I never saw that aggression in him, because all I saw was the love of a grandfather and how amazing he was. But that's what I mean, that we don't have to be like, okay, you have to be a super soft guy now, or you have to be this. It's not a one-dimensional thing as to what a man is. It's being able to know exactly when is the time to show up.
This is such a beautiful conversation. Kate, you got any thoughts on all of this?
Yeah, man, I don't even know where to start. To Sean, to your point about feeling like you're not able to provide in the same ways or as much anymore. I mean, I think that I hear that a lot from guys that I know, and in relationships that, I think that that's a pretty common thing. And I don't have any answers. I would maybe flip it back to you guys, and maybe it's a discussion for another time of like, what would right look like today? Like how would you go about addressing that in some way? And what would it feel like, or what would you want to be able to do? Is that possible? And to Alana's point, there is a time when things do shift, and maybe right now it's the phase of providing the can of beans, but it hasn't always been that, right? And like, it won't always be that way. There will be other times where you're able to show up and provide in various ways. And sometimes it is tapping into that masculine, right? Like Alana said about the importance of anger when it's appropriate and rightly placed. Like to quote Rage Against the Machine, anger is a gift. Like, absolutely, it's a gift. And when used right, it's important, right? You don't want to not ever tap into that. But I think that's where the wisdom comes in, and that exploration of like sort of owning your masculinity. If you have to go through life figuring out what it is and really owning that and understanding it for yourself, you get to a place, I think, where you understand when is it right to show up fully in that energy with all of the force behind it. What those situations are and what's called for. I think, you start to navigate that a little bit better. And so I think that there's something there about, you're doing things in a different way, or you have a slightly different role in a relationship or at your job, but your masculinity doesn't have to wane because of that. Who you are as a man doesn't have to diminish because of that. It's just unfortunately, it's a challenge placed on you as the man to figure out how do I still embrace that in these new roles, I guess. And I think one of the things too about the masculine and the feminine that's so great about partnership is like, when you have a partner, when you're in a relationship where you both kind of understand these terms and that they are complementary, sometimes you can work with each other to allow your partner to show up more in his masculine, and you can step back. I think, Alana, as women in the world today, a lot of times we have to show up with masculine energy to get things done. And to hold our own in situations that are really high stakes and intense. And Sometimes we can bring that home into our relationships, and we're in a relationship with somebody who might be, very masculine himself. And sometimes by us being in our masculine energy and bringing those traits forward, it doesn't allow our partner to fully embrace that side of themselves. And so if you have a partner who understands, and you mentioned this, you feel safe to drop into that feminine, it also allows them to show up fully in their masculine. And that's a beautiful dance back and forth that like fulfills that need that we have. So again, with partnership, you can really work on that and reflect back for each other in a really healthy way that allows you to explore those depths. That I think is really important. Again, like if we stay isolated and alone, we don't really figure a lot of this stuff out. We just kind of keep functioning and it's sort of okay, but it's in partnership or in tribe and community where we understand ourselves better. And then these terms, I think, get better defined. So I think that, I think this idea is constantly evolving as we grow and get more experience in life. And then of course, society changes alongside of us, but yeah.
It brings to mind skill sets for me. This is what, like, as everyone's been talking about in terms of provision, you have, I guess when masculinity was, say, perhaps a simpler concept or simpler idea, you would need less skill sets throughout life. So I'm thinking, I actually just watched a thing on social media a little while ago about the evolution of grandparents as to like why, evolutionarily speaking, grandparents are important. What role do they serve in the human within the human society? But one of them was a skill transfer, because if you have somebody who is in their 40s, 50s, 60s, who is still breeding instead of transferring knowledge, they become, it's less evolutionarily net positive kind of deal. But if you have somebody that can step away from the breeding pool and then pass on knowledge, that is extremely helpful because you're not competing versus skill transfer. And I think guys especially, we like to find a niche. We like to find something that we're good at and that we can provide on a regular basis and just give okay, I'm really good at doing this. I feel comfortable in it. And then we, as you said, we get to become our masculine selves in that moment. But we forget that we have to continue building those skill sets. We have to learn new things. We have to add in new things. And I think some of the struggles with nowadays, there's so many options, right? There's so many things to learn. There's too many things to what could represent masculinity in those moments. So especially for the young guys who have never experienced themselves in the truly masculine position, they just, Sean and I had a number of conversations about dabbling, right? And just touching on things. We've never taken the time to develop the skill set to such a degree that we can then be comfortable in it. I know I struggled with this for years, where I would have a base level of knowledge and think that that was sufficient to move on to something else down the road without ever developing that skill. And it led me into a lot of periods of time where I thought I was providing, but I wasn't really giving anything. It's a whole other realm here. Pat, you got any thoughts on anything?
Sure. A few things. One, if there's guys listening to this and they're having a hard time defining masculinity, they should go back to the podcast about authenticity, right? Because masculinity, sometimes I think we put too much of a, let's say, like, hard term to it. It's not a black and white definition, and that's basically what we've been talking about this whole time. If you're authentic to yourself and authentic to others, right, and you have masculine traits, they are going to show up and they're going to be there, and you should take note of those things, right? This is all about being mindful, I think, at the end of the day, right? Because I do consider myself masculine. But like at the beginning of the conversation, I didn't have an easy way to define it. I just knew that I was my authentic self, and I could see that within myself. I found it very interesting too. Also, we talk about society, and this is one thing that I think that we have a hard time dealing with as masculine men is, Alana was talking about her grandfather flattening out that guy. And I've been in a situation or situations in which, that should have been the answer. It should have been, and then, like I said, in the military, that was cool. I mean, that was accepted. And I think that's why we have a hard time sometimes integrating into civilian life. I have a disagreement, a heated enough disagreement with somebody. I can epaulets off, we go back and we sort it out, and it's done. It's done, and it's over. And there's been times where I've needed to do that in civilian world, and the society's like, you do that and you're gonna have a criminal charge. You know what I mean? It's that easy. It's that quick. There's cameras everywhere. You're not getting out of this. You're gonna have to pay a piper that I shouldn't have to in order to keep, we'll say, masculinity in check in the modern world, right? So that was just a couple little things that I had brewing in my brain.
I love that instant accountability from back in the day. But you're right, and this made me think of the idea of the fact that what used to be good masculinity, what used to be a kind of a standardized version where there was direct accountability in the instant of, you talk nasty about my wife, well, you're going to feel it. There was that understanding. Whereas now you will get punished for doing that. And I think that's an interesting key kind of area to go down. Sean, what do you got?
Gonna throw a twist in. Let's see where this goes. So we're talking about defining masculinity through maybe a set of rules, a set of standards, a set of societal norms. How about this? Let's scrap all of that stuff up, just for the moment. I know it's all legit, but let's just throw it out the window for a sec. Start with a clean slate. How about this as masculinity? It came to mind a few minutes ago. When I used to fly over to Ireland, Northern Ireland, Omagh County, Tyrone, where my family kind of hangs, he's passed away now, but I had an uncle, Uncle Shay. Uncle Shay was a big Irishman with a big, strong handshake. I'd fly over, and it started off simple. It started off when I was a young buck, like a young teen. I'd fly over with my folks, and Shay might even pick us up at the airport. And one of the very first things I loved to do in Ireland was shake Uncle Shay's hand. As it was reaching out, I'd be like, oh, this is the moment. And he had the strongest grip. He had such a handshake. He was a freaking manly man in my eyes. And here's why I thought he was a manly man. Because that handshake, we were both super freaking present in that moment. We both knew what was up. We both knew what was happening in that moment. We were both holding each other accountable. We're both very present. On the plane, as I was flying over, I was just like, I wonder how strong it's going to be this year. I wonder if I can match him. I wonder if I'll beat him this year. You know what I'm saying? And so there came a time when I saw Uncle Shay for the first time. And like there was family members, it had built up into a thing every time I went over. Now family members would stand around and wait for the handshake moment with Uncle Shay. And I'll never forget the moment that we shook. And now I was in the commando at this point. We shook hands and I was like, oh, it's on like Donkey Kong. I gotcha. And it was a crucible moment. It was a rite of passage moment. But really what it was Shay and I being extremely present in perhaps the most masculine of moments. When you look another dude in the eye and you shake his hand and you see what's up. You get to see what's behind the handshake. You get to see what's behind the eyes. You get to see the man in the moment. And I don't think that happens often enough. I mean, we can set conventions and standards and protocols and principles and all of these aspirational things about it, what it means to be masculine. But they're all academic if you don't spend your life in the real time paying attention to the handshake moments of the world. So now I'll throw it back to you guys.
Ooh, I'm going to go right back to Pat. What do you think? Handshake moments.
I think it's funny because the whole time I'm thinking about that, I was thinking about my old man. It'd always be like, you want to twist wrists for $1, So we'd arm wrestle every so often, And I remember being like, a young kid, like trying to arm wrestle my old man. And that moment, you know, like, and it's just one of those things like, oh, damn, I'm gonna have to like arm wrestle my dad, but I'm not gonna back down. You know, I mean, I don't know if that was like a masculine animal thing that was already in my head. Well, I'm not gonna back down. I'm gonna, yeah, of course I am. You know, and of course I'd lose. You know, and you know, half the time it's like going up against the steel girder, and you know, like, but even up until the point where I was, you know, a young buck in the military, you know, come home for Christmas and be like, twist wrist for $1. Be like, yeah, and you know, like you have that moment where, you know, there's like that force is finally matched and you beat him. And it's kind of an interesting moment because not only, you know, is it like, yeah, I beat my old man, like I can finally match his strength, right? And you feel like you stepped into a certain era of your life, but you can also see the pride in his eyes, you know, knowing that he lost, you know, and that I've come up to that level. So it's a very interesting moment. And I guess it comes back down to, of course, having strong male influences in your life, healthy, strong male influences in your life, and throughout your life. It doesn't matter if that changes to friends or if it's grandparents or it's teammates or workmates. It doesn't matter. I think mentorship, and I've talked about this a lot in many of our podcasts, mentorship is a very important part of shaping who we are as human beings, and having strong masculine mentors is very important.
Yeah, I totally agree with both you guys. And I actually had a moment with my granddad. I beat him in chess for the first time. And so even that little, it's in that little competition. It's in that passage of the torch kind of moment where you recognize like, okay, I can step into this realm now. I can move. Yeah, the Pathfinder. Exactly. There you go, Sean. I like it. But I think that's a key point. Now, and I want to extend that too. It's not just about when you're young and getting those moments, but it's through life getting those moments, constantly seeking out the next torchbearer that you want to take over for, that next rite of passage throughout life. And I think it's got to be a continual. Dean Stott just hit us up on the Instagram site. He said, "Chance, did you beat him at arm wrestling?" I did not. I never actually tried to arm wrestle my granddad. Sorry. We were playing chess a lot. But I want to hear what the ladies have to say about this too. In that, have you ever witnessed those rites of passage? You ever seen those happen? Let's go to Kate. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. I think that there's something to that maybe isn't that it doesn't seem to be valued as much today anymore, but is really important. Like as you said, I mean, it's there's so much that you can experience in that handshake moment, and this sort of it's seeing the other person and then having them reflect back to you who you are too. It's like it's a very unique thing. So I think there's something to that, and I think too to the point about having those experiences when you're young. But I think that, you know, this idea of masculinity as you framed it, Sean, is really interesting. And I think that does evolve over time, in that you look for other examples or other situations and experiences that kind of where you get to do that again and again and over again. But I think at some point you also become the mentor at some point. You know, you become the uncle or the grandfather at some point. And so it's this continuum of you continuing to explore that and gaining this greater understanding of who you are and your masculinity, and then being that person for others. That mentorship is sort of, I think, a requirement of masculinity. If you don't pass that on, then, you know, it seems like it isn't really truly masculinity, I guess. There's like a necessary part of mentoring others in that process. And this is totally an aside, but it made me think of this as sort of like the female correlate, right? Of like, you know, two men shaking hands, the way that masculinity is experienced, I think, from the female side, from the feminine side, it's not necessarily that strong handshake and looking in the eyes as much as it is like that really firm hug and looking in the eyes, and having that person be so present and you feel so safe with, and you know that they've got you, you know that they see you, and that's it. It's like words don't even have to be spoken. It's just that presence that's so powerful. And you know it. It's like you can't put it into words sometimes, but you know it when you feel it. You know it when you see it. So I think there are some of these sort of, quote unquote, unwritten aspects of masculinity that maybe aren't valued as much because we are living in a very data-oriented society. People want terms and words and clear definitions, and that doesn't always translate well to certain things. So
I love that you bring that up, because we had a conversation on faith last week, and that was one of the points that kept getting brought up, was that, like, I feel it, I know it's there, I don't know how to quantify it. There's no way I can give you a number or something tangible to look at, and it's just, that's such a great point. Couple comments I want to touch on, and I just want to say, all the people commenting, thank you guys. I've been watching on the side here. There are a ton of comments on this. I just haven't gotten to them all. Alan Shabaro jumped in here. Good to see Alan. He says, I'm going to give you a big old hug when I see you. Just be ready. So I'm excited for that one. And then Army Sergeant Major Tim's here. He said, the handshake was taught and practiced to my kids along with eye contact, which I think I do the same thing. I practice with my kids, look people in the eye when you speak to them, shake hands. That's such a key point in the mentorship role that you take on as a father, especially. Alana, you got any? Oh, what do you got, Sean?
Sorry, because Tim's name came up. We'll be seeing Tim in about 3 weeks when we go out to Operation Pegasus Jump. And the reason I'm saying that is because that'll be our 4th year attending. Keegan will be there for his 4th year in a row, and he'll be looking forward to shaking Tim's hand and looking him in the eye. And so, like, to some degree, we're driving like to Vancouver Island, so it'll take us like it'll cost me a boatload of money and a boatload of hours to get out to a DZ on Vancouver Island, and I would pay 10 times that and drive 10 times further for my son to experience the mentors that he's going to be hanging out with. Like, every hand he shakes will be worth $1 million to me, because I'm taking him to a pool of men who kind of know what it means to be masculine, even though they don't know how to define it. And so I think, to some degree, as a dad, I've got a responsibility to put him in a pool of raw talent of masculinity, so that not only can he see the best case scenarios, he can see sort of like on either side of the best case scenarios, but at least he's in a pool of freaking hardcore masculine men. Like, if you jump out of perfectly good airplanes in a commando, and now you're retired and you're hanging out at a drop zone, and then you're shaking my son's hand, like, it's probably not because you were demasculated. And so I feel it's a responsibility for me as a father to get my boys in a pool of raw talent, so that they can then begin to understand their own version of what masculinity is. But at least I'm throwing them in the deep end of freaking shark-filled masculinity. And I think there's something to be said about that. I really do. I think that if your only understanding of masculinity is the shallow end of, ballerinas, then, I think you've got a pretty limited view of what masculinity is. I really do think that you got to put your kids into arenas, as it were.
That's such a great point, and I totally agree with you. Alana, you got any thoughts on any of that?
Yeah, it's interesting when we started off this subject, I did immediately go, we're going to be talking about men, we're going to be talking about the masculine, and we're going to be talking about, but I think as we've been having this conversation, it has been the more realization that we are talking about men and women. We're talking about being able to balance that yin and yang, the masculine and feminine, and build it together. I think that you could all probably sit here and think, if I think of a person who really embodies strength and power and safety and that presence that you just absolutely know, when you're in that room with that person, they make you feel a certain way. And that can be male or female. Like, if you think about whoever that person is, that as soon as you're in the room with them, you're like, oh, this guy is, or this girl is somebody important, there's somebody special, there's somebody that's going to protect me, they make me feel safe. They've often got very similar traits. They're very calm people, but still with like an incredible strength of presence. And I think that the way that those people are is because they've managed to perfect that masculine, feminine energy within them, so that it just shows as like, it's not just some big burly guy who's coming in and tough as nails and could break your neck, and you know, he's not like Chuck Norris, but he's somebody who can do that, but can also balance it, can give you that hug when needed. If he needs to shed a tear, he'll shed a tear. Like, he can do all those things. And then the woman who's the same, who's able to be that mother in presence, but you know that, you know, when somebody comes at, there was an incident just this morning when I went to Starbucks with my daughter, and this guy came out, and, you know, just know when he's looking that bit too much. He's 14. And I kind of looked and I clocked him, and I clocked that he was still doing it. And then he'd done it again, and the bear just came out of me. I was, and I won't swear, but I did swear in the middle of Orange County car park. It was a who the hell do you think you're looking at? And this energy came up inside of me where I would kill if I have to, you know, that's going to happen if it has to. So it's been able to say, but I'm still here, and I'm still mom, and I'm still going to hug you and like kiss you goodnight and do all those things and balance that energy. And then back to what you were saying earlier about the guards on the door and why they were still guarding that door years later when the building had been painted. And I think it goes to this conversation as well, because if you think about who asks that question, like, why are we painting that? Why are we guarding that door? It's kids. Kids are like, why? If you've got, I mean, I've got young kids, and it's a constant why? Like, it never ends. But it does end when we start telling them no, like, stop asking questions, just do it, just do what you're told, just do as I've told you to do, stop it. And we stop the questions, we stop the whys and the curiosity and the exploration, because it's annoying constantly hearing why. But I think that personally, I'm the person who's still asking the questions. I'm constantly asking the why. Why are we going through that door when we could go through that door? Why are we doing this thing when we could do it this way? Let's bend it. Let's flex it. And yeah, the world's evolving into this like wild way of so many things here. But again, then back to your point, John, when you said that we've got to learn all these new skill sets and be like adapt to everything. But I don't believe that. I think we have to hone in on those real primitive skill sets that we had, because yes, we've got tools like AI, but are they actually benefiting us, or are they just switching our brains off that we're not doing what we could be doing? Use them where they need to be used, but creating those really strong foundations that we've always had for thousands and thousands of years of knowing how to do those very, very, very basic skills, and having them solidified, whether that be in a feminine way or a masculine way, but solidify the absolute core of our ancestors. And then all the other stuff's going to come and go. Like, things are going to come and go and start and finish. But if we've built that strong foundation, and I really think that we can find that really good balance of masculine and feminine.
I could not agree with that more. I love doing masculine things. I say masculine things, but like when I feel most in my masculine, I'm hunting, I'm fixing the car, I'm building something, I'm doing something that's just a skill set that I've built over the years, but I have been taught over the years through other men that I saw as masculine. Same thing with learning chess, being able to sit and think strategically. All these things are from mentors of mine that I've seen throughout the years. And
I just want to be careful for a sec on the stereotypes in respect to hunting and fixing cars and all that good stuff. There's probably a boatload of women out there that would kick your arse and all of those things. And so, you know, the point is that most men, me included, you Chance, you Pat, throughout our lives, we have picked up on stereotypes and thought, well, men hunt, women don't, or whatever. I'm keeping things super simple now. But, you know, those are all just stupid labels, man. They're just dumb labels. And I think that humans are capable of anything that they want to be capable of. And if we can just keep it simple as like masculinity or femininity, that plays into whether you can hunt or not. Not that you can hunt just as a man or just as a woman. And so like the gender aspects of these particular fixing a car or whatever, like I can't freaking fix a car. I suck as a mechanic. I really do. And so like, does that make me a non-man? Because I don't know how to frickin' take an engine out of a car, well, guess what? I guess I'm a non-man because like I've never had to do it, and I don't see me doing it anytime in the future. So, labels kind of suck currently, particularly in the social media world. It's easy to slip down this, well, I fix cars, therefore I am a man. And I totally disregard that as an idea. Just food for thought.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Go ahead, Kate. What do you got?
I was just going to say, I wanted to echo that too, just say that, like, I don't know if it's helpful, but the way I like to think about masculine and feminine is not what we do, but it's how we do it. So like, I love to hunt. I have a Rocky Mountain elk right there, and I'm very much I have moments where, I have to jump into the masculine to do certain things and be around certain people and all that. But I'm very much in my feminine the majority of the time. And I have brought that into hunting experiences. And I'm very emotional when it comes to hunting, and I take that life. And there's so many things that show up for me, and it's, I'm hunting alongside men and other women, and we're all doing the same thing, but we're approaching it differently with different energy, different traits. Our experiences are going to be a little bit different. So it's not necessarily what we're doing, but kind of how we're doing it, I think. And maybe that makes it a little bit, more helpful for people to frame it, because, Sean, to your point, like, we're all capable of all kinds of things. It's just, how do we do it? And that also speaks to how our brains are wired too. I mean, we can arrive at the same conclusions, but men typically will problem solve in different ways than women will. We might get the same answer, but we got there different ways, and that's okay. So it's a beautiful thing about being human, and we're all a little different. So
I know we're almost out of time. I want to throw this message out to everyone who's listening as well, because Alana has been pushing this throughout the podcast, and it's this yin and yang. It's the male female. It's working together as a team, either within yourself or with your partner. And so I was thinking about Dean and Alana as partners, and the first three words that came to mind were calm, capable, and confident. That's what I think of as, I thought of Dean and his big bald head and all his muscles and his skill sets. And he's freaking calm, capable, and confident, because that's what he was taught to be, or that's what he's earned or owned. But then I thought, what does Alana represent? And the three words were calm, capable, and confident. And so, like, you both represent on the male and female side kind of the same thing. And when I see that, I designate that as a power couple. And so what is a power couple? Well, there's not too many power couples in my world, but believe it or not, Alana and Dean, I designated them as a power couple quite some time ago. And I think it's important for people to look for power couples, to see what that looks like, to see how that feels to you, to see what it represents to you. Because I can guarantee you that there'll be people who don't jive on Dean and Alana. Well, I don't know why, but there will be people, whatever. But they'll jive on the couple down the street who are now their power couple for whatever reason. They jive on that. They don't jive on this. And so I think on this male-female, yin-yang, this power couple idea, it's an important aspect of understanding, ultimately, perhaps, how you can best define not just your own little solo journey in respect to masculinity, but like as a team, understand what masculinity means.
Yeah. And I appreciate you guys clarifying my statement there earlier. It is exactly what you guys are talking about. What my continuation of that thought was going to be that's how I feel about my masculine in those. I feel authentically masculine when I'm doing those things, because the people that I attach to, the people that I look to as masculine growing up, did those skill sets. So it feels natural to me. And then everybody's going to have those things, right? Sean, like you said, you can't fix a car. That doesn't make you less of a man. It just, you trying to fix a car wouldn't make you feel masculine. So that's what I was going to get at. But I do love that clarification, because it's 100% true and necessary to know that the skill sets that we have don't make us masculine. How we present with those skill sets can make us masculine for sure. Now, we are just about 2 hours here, and I just want to say thank you, guys. This has been awesome. There's a ton of comments on here that I really appreciate everyone's integration with the show, but there's such great conversation. I didn't want to jump in there. Any final thoughts? Anything still bubbling in the back of our brains in terms of masculinity at all? I'm going to go through everybody. Alana, you're on the bottom here. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's really great that we've really gone into both sides of humans, really, and we were working out what the balance is there. And I think that sometimes we can get confused. And there's a really interesting book that I once read. It was called The Chimp Paradox, and it really goes into the different parts of our brain that we work with. And it's the human brain and the chimp brain. And it basically talks about how sometimes we react with our chimp and sometimes we react with our human. And generally our human's going to be a lot calmer and a lot more controlled and a lot more thought out on what our answer is going to be, where the chimp's just going to go in all like wild and crazy. And there was a long time that I used to associate that with the chimp was the masculine and the human was the feminine. And I had that real deep association. Even when I finished reading the book, I was like, the chimp's the male, but it really isn't. We've all got that chimp within us and that human within us. And it's just how that's going to show up and who gets the ultimate say within us. And if we find that the chimp's responding a lot more, then we work on that and we work out how we can get him to settle down a little bit and put our human a bit more further. So that just to say that it's not just trying to find this, I need to find the male in me, I need to find the female in me. It's like we've already got that kind of balance in there. We can work it all out, but how do we then control each element of that?
I love it. Pat, you got any final thoughts?
Yeah, like I guess, because this is also, Men's Mental Health Month. One of the biggest things is the internal struggle. So again, go back to Authenticity podcast, start to be mindful, start to think about, some of the concepts that we're talking about today. I still don't think we've really truly defined it. We've definitely explored a lot of corners of the whole topic, and I really love that. And I love that we are really starting to pick it apart. But I don't think it's yet defined from this single podcast. And I'll touch on like the internal struggle for a moment too, right? Like make sure you have think about some of those mentors that we were talking about before. Like, there are going to be guys that you want to be able to talk to, and don't be afraid to approach them, whether it's your friends or even somebody that you don't know, you reach out to them. If you're struggling or having a hard time with just your world or whatever, because there is a paradigm of masculinity where we don't talk about sometimes our internal feelings and the internal struggles that we have. And so just make sure that you do that.
Yeah, totally agree with that one. Kate, you got any final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, kind of like what Pat said, I really appreciate everybody here trying to look at this thing from all different sides and angles, because it is complicated. And I think we would do a disservice to just give it like a little, contrite definition and move on. I mean, this is complex, and it's comforting to know that there are others who think about these things in these kinds of ways as well. And like I said before, there's like order, disorder, reorder thing. I mean, I'm hopeful that we're all moving towards better understanding. And as we understand things better, we can put practices into place that serve ourselves better. And so I'm really hopeful about where all of this is going. And I just appreciate everybody and all of what you guys provided and shared. I learned a ton. So thanks.
It is truly our pleasure. So thank you guys for being here. Sean, you got any final thoughts?
I do. Just two things. One is for most of the men out there. We tend to think in physicality terms. We tend to define ourselves based on our physicality, what we can accomplish physically. Well, I would challenge every man to engage in their writing, in their philosophical considerations, maybe writing a poem or something like that is outside of your norm, which isn't all about barbells and dumbbells and hunting. Maybe you can hunt a sheet of paper that's blank right now, and by the end of today, you could create something as a win for you. Dive a little bit deeper into that internal world, I think, is not a bad way to go. The other thing that I would like to say is I'm in agreement with how Pat started off with. We have touched into some of the corners of this topic, but there's still a lot of shady areas or shadowed areas on the conversation. As is often the case here, we usually round out with, well, we kind of covered some of the subject, but we really need another podcast on the same topic to like really nail it down. We'd never nail it down. We could do another 10 podcasts on this topic and we would not solve the Rubik's Cube. But what we are doing is we're turning the Rubik's Cube around right now in a three-dimensional fashion to some degree and looking at the sides at the very least. Like we haven't solved the puzzle. We're just looking at all sides of it. And so I think everyone who's out there listening, particularly the men right now, masculinity is your Rubik's Cube. And chances are you've probably only been looking at one side. So start spinning that bat. Don't try to solve the puzzle. Just start spinning that bad boy around and looking at all the sides of you, both internal and external, and see sides that you've never seen before. Once you've done that, maybe you can start twisting things up a little bit.
I love that metaphor. And I find a lot of this question, I said it in my trailer, in the trailer we put out, was the fact that it's not really about finding an answer. It's about asking questions, asking good questions. How do we develop the questions themselves? And a lot of it comes down to testing. You got to try stuff. Pat, you said, reach out to your mentors, reach out to your peers, reach out to the people around you. But also at the same time, be ready for your views to be challenged, and to be challenged to such a degree that you might not like it. Because that's part of the exploration. That's part of the hierarchy. That's part of accountability. That's part of the things, is that you're going to be challenged. Accept that the challenge is there. Work forward from there. I love this. So I can't thank you guys enough for being on here. It's been a fantastic conversation. And as we all continue to learn, build, and grow, we'll see you next week. Chimo.
Thanks everybody for watching and being part of the collective. If this has sparked any thoughts or resonated with you, let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us grow and keeps the conversation going. We'll see y'all next time.